I can make a copy.
Here's to hat night. This is outstanding. Everybody looks so good in their hats. Who wants to talk about their chapeau first?
Will do.
All right, I'm gonna go with the double whammy of Ryan and Laura. I'm gonna spotlight you. Hang on. Excellent.
Whoa, is that what we look like?
Oh, we're hideous. So I'm wearing a navy flat hat worn like a beret, like the female yeoman did. So they took out the grommet that keeps it out like a pancake, and they just wore it all smushed down on their heads. This one is an original, and I've used it to reproduce others. It just has a U.S. Navy tally. It's pretty faded. And then it's a private purchase one. It's got a nice label from Detroit in it. It did have a sweatband. It was a painted fabric one, and it was real crunchy. So that had to come out initially. And I still have the grommet, but it's two maybe like 1/8 inch pieces of wire that were then covered in paper to fit them together, and then fabric to keep it from rubbing.
Hey, Laura, excuse me, what kind of fabric was it? What did it look like?
What
was the fabric nondescript, or was it anything that would have any kind of description to it?
Oh, on the grommet?
No, on the fabric itself. The
outer fabric of the hat?
Because early stuff, often they have, the inside thing that was all crumpled side, the fabric sweatband that you called it.
Yeah.
Can you describe that? The fabric itself?
Yeah, so it's a plain weave, kind of a natural color. Okay. It looks unbleached, but hard to tell because then the outer part was painted kind of a dull brown. I couldn't quite tell just the way after it had been coated if it was cotton or a linen. It probably could go either way. I'd have to look at it closer, but yeah, it was just so brittle from the paint, how it hardened over time. I have it saved it separate from the hat, but while Ryan's talking about his Glenn's, I can go and grab it and show that later.
Okay, thank you.
Laura, they had to buy their own hats?
No, I'm not sure about the procurement on these. And with the Yeoman F, it was never part of their actual uniform. They just sometimes wore them, and where they got them from, I don't know. This just happened to be the one that I picked up off eBay, and it did have this private label in it. So Todd could probably talk a little bit more to the sourcing of them than I can.
Cool. Well, Ryan, I already asked you what is up with the red and white checkerboard. I never knew. It's so cool.
Well, this is a Glengarry, so it's a Scottish cap. This one's for the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders. They were the only unit that wore red and white dicing. So if you see red and white dicing, you know it's a Argyll cap, and they're all, really deep navy blue, indigo, so they almost look black. There were a couple different ones. The Black Watch, I got a couple examples here. So Black Watch, the Royal Highlanders, their cap did not have any dicing on it, and no rosette, no cockade. And Pipers in every unit wore just a flat blue Glengarry. The Scottish Rifles, the Cameronians, and the Highland Light Infantry wore rifle green. Glengarry's, and then most of the other regiments wore like this. So they wore it was red, white, and green dicing. It looks black, but it is green. And so most of the reenactors that you see who do like Gordon Highlanders, Seaforth Highlanders, most of their caps have black dicing because the green is pretty hard to come by. But this one is actually original. I don't know what year. It's probably between World War I and World War II, but it's the one. It has the band is woven right into the body of the cap, and the dicing again looks black, but it is green. I mean, it's really hard to tell. But I found period sources, and the curator of the Queen's Own Scottish Borders Museum actually confirmed that for me, that it is a green dicing, because I did get into a couple heated arguments with other reenactors about the color of the dicing. So I reached out to the curator of the museum, the regimental museum, and he confirmed it. So, and also the Royal Regiment of Scotland, the present regiment, they actually do wear this green dicing on their Glengarry's, and it even says it in their regulations that it is green. So,
What's that in the back? What's in the back?
just little tallies. So a lot of times they would cut them off. This one I cut this one off because it's not original. So you see it a lot with cyclists. They would cut off, Highland cyclists would cut off the tallies because they get in the way. And just a lot of guys, even in the trenches when they were still wearing these in 14 and 15, they would cut them off because they just get in the way.
That's cool. Any more questions for these guys? Laura, did you find what you're looking for?
Yes, so this is the original sweatband. This is the inside of it, and I was wrong. It's actually a twill weave, and it does have a little bit of a nap to it. So now I'm almost even wondering if it might be wool. I may have to do a little bit of a burn test on some of these loose threads. But then the outside that is painted, it's a very thick layer there. And then the grommet is in very rough shape, but you can see it's got the fabric covering and then a metal clasp to hold it together. And the regs just say sheeting. So this is just a plain weave cotton, fairly, I'd say it's probably close to a modern like quilting weight. And then on the end where things are even iffier here, these are the wires that are then set into this paper band.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I found that the modern hooping for like Civil War hoop skirts, some of it is a little bit more flexible like this, that has two separate pieces that aren't completely encased heavily in plastic, that are a little bit easier to manipulate, because this is really easy to get in and out of the hat, although I try to not do that very much because it's like this. But some of the repros, some of the guys it's really hard to get the grommet out without really manhandling it a lot. So the lighter weight stuff is better in what I found in reproducing them. So
Thank you.
Was it typical that that all the ladies take that stuff out of there and turn it into a beret?
I've seen one photo where, I think only one photo, that they are wearing it with the grommet in it.
So it's typical they took it out.
It's not typical for them to be wearing these. It was an off regulation thing. But one, before they had their official uniforms, and two, I've also seen more of this worn with the winter cape. So I don't know if they wore this. I will tell you that the wide brimmed standard uniform hat tends to blow off your head. They did have chin straps, but they're also really uncomfortable and awkward. So I don't know if it was just something that they preferred to do in the cold weather when they were wearing their cape and maybe off duty. I don't know. It was definitely not a sanctioned use of it.
Yeah, I think that the wide brim cap that the Yeomanettes wore and Army Nurse Corps wore, I think they were all from the same, basically the same form that were made. Does anybody have any thoughts about that? Nope.
The standard one, the regulations just give them dimensions and materials, and there was never one standard place that they were getting them from, because a lot of theirs were private purchase. And you see ones of all different weird materials. There's some that are very clearly the heavy fur that's been shellacked down. There's some that are black. They're the navy or black, but they're straw. You see a little bit of everything because there were regulations, but they were more like guidelines.
The Nurse Corps wore the straw one also.
Yeah.
I had a question for any Navy expert. Like, when did the tally start with the ship names? When did that come into being used?
You actually see that during the American Civil War, and a little bit before as well. But it's one of those things that kind of comes and goes, where especially in wartime, they just went to the straight U.S. Navy or just had nothing at all. Mostly, again, they didn't want to know who was in port at different times. But mostly in peacetime that you see a lot of the ship names. But I'm trying to remember where they have different examples of during the Civil War with some names painted on the tallies.
Cool.
Yeah, for the women, they apparently issued them U.S. Naval Reserve Force ones until they ran out of those, and then they started just issuing them U.S. Navy ones. Although I've seen some with submarine bases on them, where the women were stationed at submarine bases. They did have that.
Cool.
But
That's cool. Who wants to talk about their hat next?
I'm wearing the, you should probably recognize a regular 1912 pattern service hat. I got a second one here that might look the same on you guys' end, but instead of the regular U.S. Army buttons, it has Army Corps of Engineer buttons. And that came with a engineer's service coat that I picked up on eBay. Also, I got a second Navy flat cap this week. It came with a uniform that arrived that fits me. So this one's missing the wire stiffener, unlike my first one. The first one was private purchase. I think they both are. And this one came from somewhere in New York, actually. And it has a tally for the USS Freedom, which was a transport ship during the First World War. The second flat cap I got, the stiffener is missing. It has a standard U.S. Navy tally, and it's got a silk-like sweatband with a little red tie and is marked for my size. So that's what I got here.
Thanks, Damian.
Do you have an opinion as to whose 1912 service caps, like the repros, are the best? I know there's a couple of those on the market now.
All my service caps are, since I was able to find an original service cap, and well, now two of them, I haven't really looked into it any further.
I have a giant coconut head, so original isn't an option for me.
I hear you there.
Regarding
they all seem to be good from what I understand.
What do you say, Bob?
Yeah, I was saying in terms of the repro cat, we usually like the stuff from What Price Glory, but I've handled a lot of his caps when we did the movie last year. Cool. And his recro officer's cap was terrible.
Oh.
Yeah, it doesn't look anything like a nice one, but it might be your only option. I don't know. Is anybody else making them? I'm not aware of it.
I thought someplace called Mike's Militaria was, or there's definitely another source other than Jerry's. I normally like Jerry's stuff, but I haven't seen one
Correct.
of his repros in person.
Not that good.
There's a repro made under the brand name Society Cap or Society Hat. He makes an officer one, but he'll also do an enlisted one on special order. The feedback on his I've seen sound like they're good, but they're pricey, but they're American made.
Eddie's. I know Eddie's got one.
This is one of Mike's. So. The
cool.
enlisted one. Yeah.
The color
Yeah,
looks good.
real good.
Yeah, it was like $90, I think. Yeah.
That's really reasonable.
Yeah.
I talked to American Patrol Company. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that because they mostly do World War II stuff. But they purchased like a supplier of officers' hats from the Second World War, but they said they actually had the patterns for the First World War caps. But they would do it on like commission, and it was fairly expensive. But they even had like original materials and stuff.
Ooh.
Yeah, they do their World War I stuff under Society brand. Society brand and American Patrol Cap are the same.
Oh, cool. Okay, we're talking about the same thing then. Yeah.
So you think if
Yeah.
we put an order together, that might bring the price down? If we said we want like 10 hats or something?
I tried that before with getting an early style of hat made before, and it wasn't that compelling to get them in order for 10.
Oh, you'd have to have a lot more?
It probably. It was reasonable, but a large quantity didn't seem to change his pricing too much. So.
Okay.
I mean, $90 is
What's on
pretty
your lid?
reasonable.
What do you got on, Todd?
So I'm weird and I like the early stuff. So this is a 1902 spec service cap for enlisted men. So unlike the later 1912s, which were more of the shape, and also because it's bizarre and you can take the grommet out of these, and it has this kind of really cool crusher style look to it that you don't really see on a lot of the other caps. These are pretty, like I said, 1902 spec, so we're pretty early on, well before World War I. Where you do see them rather frequently is Coast Artillery batteries, things like that, where they didn't really have a lot of up-to-date, newest material. The badge on it looks like the officer's collar insignia, but it is actually a screwback device. And this one is 4th Company Coast Artillery Corps, which is a company that was stationed at Fort Mott. So shout out to those guys. But places like that, you'd see a lot of really old, weird khaki uniforms and caps and things, even up into 1914, 15, 16. They had a lot of the older, weirder stuff. And I've got a lot of other bizarre things, but I'll let everybody else go.
Did the actual regulations change, or was it more of a style type of thing?
The uniform regulations in 1902 totally revamped the American uniform after the Spanish-American War. So in 1902, they redefine everything. So they redefine summer weight service uniforms, wool weight service uniforms, dress uniforms, full dress uniforms, white uniforms, mess dress, etc. So everything got changed in 1902. And just little bits and pieces change over time. So the specifications then change depending upon what pattern they want to adjust. Like the uniform specifications changed a few times, but 1902 is kind of where all of the fundamentals start from. That's where you get an olive drab uniform. That's where you get all the things that we know and love from World War I, basically, for the U.S. So that's where all that starts.
Isn't that when the blue capes were authorized? Like it had like branch of service lining or something like that?
Yeah, so the dress uniforms, we'll kind of go through definitions here. So this was service for summer weight. So this is just cotton. This is full dress. And the way these hats were designed, they have a little band that you can remove. And so for undress, you would just take the band off. So officers' service, which I think I saw somebody wearing, was, again, it's wool, and there was a cotton version for summer weight. And then their undress was this style, and their full dress was with the branch of service color. So that's kind of a running theme where when you go to your full dress option, you get more of the dressy branch colors.
Hey, Todd, there was a shift in that whole period from black to brown.
Yep. See, so all these early ones have black bills, whereas the 1912 caps, that's where you get the brown rims, where you get what we're used to seeing in 1917, 1918.
What I'm saying is there are examples of that 1902 cap with the color change on it.
Really? No, that's interesting. I've never seen one of those.
I'll show them to you to see it. If the other guys don't want to see it, I won't bother them, but I'll show you the color change.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. I'm into really bizarre things.
I'll show you bizarre. Okay.
I guess that change went throughout the entire Army because almost all leather things went from black to brown around that time. I know that the saddles and whatnot did.
Yeah, that was 1903.
Oh, 03. Okay.
It's very strange. You see black brim up into the aunts and the teens worn with brown equipment. So like the 1902 service cap for officers has a black brim, but the leather gear, it was brown. It's kind of an odd combination. Whether that was intentional or not, I don't know. But it's just kind of, like I said, part of that transition.
Cool. Bob, you have anything to show us?
Hey, Todd, I'm going to show this to Todd just for an example, and then we'll do it. Let's see. All right, Todd.
Okay.
Oh, that's cool.
Brown.
That might
Yeah, so you don't want to have general service buttons, just a remnant of the chin strap.
Right. Yeah.
There it is.
No, that's pretty cool.
Probably in that transition period, maybe 1910, 11.
Does it have rimmed buttons or rimless buttons?
These have rim buttons on them.
Yeah, so it's probably still using the 1902 shape. And obviously that's post 1910 buttons. So yeah, so the difference between 1902 and 1912 is if you hold these up here. 1902 is more familiar with the shape of the bell crown. 1912 looks a lot more like what we're used to seeing caps look like. So,
it's pretty bell, Todd.
Yeah, so I was going to say yours is pretty cool. That's a nice.
It's the only one I have like that. All the other examples I have are black.
Yeah, and that was pretty common with the officers' uniforms because all of these were privately made, and the tailor that the guy decided to buy his hat from might still be using old patterns. So another good example from that on the early end of the spectrum is you see pre-1902 buttons on some officers' caps. So that
yes,
that's a Span Am style button, and that's more common what you'd see on early 1902.
Is that a domed?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Todd, is that a domed button? Yeah. I have one example like that with the dome button in a blue service cap like that.
Yeah, I think they're all those weird transitional quirks are part of the fun. That's part of what makes some of these things really interesting.
Yep.
And of course, the guys who bought them probably didn't care. It's only 100 years, and collector interest that has changed whether or not anybody actually finds this stuff interesting. Yeah.
Right.
I feel bad for those poor officers that had to have like 36 different caps to satisfy everyone.
Yeah. So service cotton, service wool, undress, full dress, and white, like that one. So you're looking at 5 or 6 caps plus a campaign hat, which is like field service.
Yep.
So, yeah, they all had to pay for that. Each one of them.
Yep.
Who's our next expert here?
I can follow on to Todd because I'm wearing the 1902 officer's wool service cap. I don't know if you can see everyone. My lighting is horrible. But same thing, black leather with a patent leather chin strap, and this is kind of a lightweight wool, but it's also very tight on my head with all this hair. So I'm gonna swap up. I've got my French style overseas cap, officer's overseas cap.
There's an awesome picture of Quentin Roosevelt wearing one of those.
What's that? The overseas cap? The French overseas cap?
The French style overseas, yeah.
Okay.
I guess he got disconnected.
It's just us, guys. It's
The
just the rest.
inmates are running the asylum. The inmates are running the asylum.
All right. Well, I guess since this is still recording, Zenny, go next.
Is it still recording?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, it is.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I had to close the door.
Oh, are you back?
I'm back. Who's next?
Oh,
Bob, you gonna show us what you got?
sure.
All
Okay.
right.
We'll do something different.
So you look with that in a minute.
Okay, you know, one of the things I really like are the oddball stuff and the unusual stuff. So I've collected American Field Service items. So I know I showed one of my uniforms last time when I did the uniforms, but I'm going to show a real early Field Service cap. For those, anybody have any questions about who the Field Service was? Should I get into that, or are we good with that? We're good. Okay. So this is a real early field. Okay, the American Field Service that has its origins from a group of volunteers that went over. There were a couple of Americans, one of which was a guy named J. Andrew Pyatt, and Pyatt raises money and sends over a group of volunteers to be non-combatants to drive ambulances for the French. Their first duties that they do early in after August of 14 through 14 and 15 is they were basically driving the ambulances within Paris for the hospitals. And this is the earliest version of a Field Service cap. It's pretty rare because it also has the rain hat on top of it. And that early shield, that early federal shield, was the first insignia on the hats for the Field Service. Very, very hard to find. Inside quilted, and most of these caps, because the guys had to get them themselves, they were, I wonder if it's better. Most of them were bought at the Old English tailors in Paris. That quilted design and that insignia was typical of Old English tailors in Paris. All right, so again, 1914, 1915, for an ambulance driver within Paris. Then they move on to the next design, which was the typical driver's caps. Now they're driving ambulances up to the front. They're driving Model Ts, but again, they have to buy their own uniforms. They look a little bit like a British trench cap. This one is really cool. It's got the second Field Service design. It is well worn. And what's nice is that, I get this, it's identified inside to John K. Conant, and it says France 1917. The other thing interesting about it is that this is Conant. This is he. This is called a Paris card. When the guys would get to Paris, they would sign their they'd sign their life away for the next 6 months, and these were the cards that had their information, the next of kin, yada yada yada, the units that they were assigned to. These were all found in France back in the 1970s by a friend of mine. They were found in a farmhouse, just laying there, close to where the field service was headquartered. He was kind enough to give me that one because I had the hat that went with it. Again, another pretty well used field service cap. They're very soft. They never had by this point they don't have any stiffeners in them. And this too is identified to a fellow by the name of Olmsted. The final design, and probably the most beautiful field service cap, is this one, which has the flaps on it for cold weather. It has unusual insignias. People wonder, well, why? What's with the crescent? Well, this unit was attached to the Moroccan troops, so he did have like an Islamic crescent on the cap. Same quilted inside, bought at the same place where the guys bought their uniforms. So those are some field service caps. Now, one of the more interesting things that the guys wore is that they were also wearing the French Adrian. And one of the things they wore was the Adrian with the U.S. shield on it, very similar to that shield that you saw on the other on that first field service cap. This one has the wreath around it. It's not identified, but it's unlike most Adrians. It still has most of its guts inside. It still has a lot of its original horizon blue. But just a real cool. You see pictures of them. There are also purportedly pictures of some of the borrowed soldiers that the French took, or the African American soldiers. There's some reports that they too were wearing that wreath to distinguish them as Americans with the French. Lastly, other helmets that the field service guys might have worn was the Adrian hat with the Republic Française and the caduceus on it. It's a pretty hard to find badge. Most of the time, you see the typical infantry badges. So that's a good look at the Republic Française and the caduceus. Again, it's got a pretty good lining inside of it, and some of the chin strap left. So that's some stuff about the Americans for the French. Let me move on to some other stuff. This is a Royal Flying Corps officer's service cap. This is a pretty early one. Get us see that you can read on there. Can we pick that up? That it's where it reads RFC.
Yeah.
See that? Yeah. It's named inside, but I've not been successful with my research. But that's your typical your typical trench cap look for the Royal Flying Corps. The same time that you had the Royal Flying Corps, the British Aviation section had a naval section too, and they were called the Royal Naval Air Service. And this is a cap of the Royal Naval Air Service. Granted, great looking lines to the stuff that it has. Similar to what you see for the RAF, but if we'll compare it, that's the let's see. There's the RAF badge, First War RAF badge. Same cap, nothing different about it except the badge. And then you have the Naval Air Service one. The wreath is smaller on them. There we go. And the RAF one is it doesn't come up over the eagle. In 1918, the Royal Naval Air Service and the Royal Flying Corps become the RAF. So that's the kind of the connection with the two branches of British aviation. Last group we'll do is just let's see. I'm going to do this on the flip. I think if I can flip this thing. Nope, I can't. I'm not going to do it. Okay, so let's just do overseas caps because we were doing those before. Again, I'm an aviation guy, so I really like to find aviation caps. This has a miniature wing and named to a pilot. This one with the piping, with aviation piping on it. Now I'm not sure if that aviation piping is of the period or just after the war. Anybody know? Hey Todd, do you know that answer?
I'd have to double check, but there was a wartime regulation for aviation piping. So there definitely were.
Okay.
But then again, whether people had them made before the end of the war, I don't know.
Yeah, not sure on that sometimes. And then you have the nice British inspired ones, which is, you see guys like typically Rickenbacker or the aviation guys. They love that one with the side flaps and double buttons. A couple of examples of this. This is a finest example that I have, which was made by a tailor. And get that. There we go.
Too much luck. And...
Yeah, they're the oldest, the oldest uniform maker in London. So if a guy's had some money, they wanted to go get a hat made by this particular company. And this is actually a nice human size 7.5. I don't think it was ever worn, but it's really a beautiful, the 2-button style. That's about as nice as you get a 2-button style. It's a rimless button, Todd.
That's cool.
Yeah,
that's
really nice.
Are they London-made buttons too?
Oh, don't know. They're real tight on there. I can't read them now. They have back marks.
I know places like J.R. Gaunt and places like that were making U.S. Insignia from time to time. So it's entirely possible that they're British made, which is, I don't think the buttons made by the Brits were flying off the shelf for their tailors. So it's possible they had some older ones that's still in stock by the time.
That makes sense. Here's an interesting one. It's a double button, double button type, but it's kind of like a French style.
If there's one thing that the Americans had a lot of variety and character with, it's the overseas caps. Every conceivable combination is found. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, this one also. And and then finally, just the nice, one with a nice Air Corps device. There was some discussion on one of the forums this week about this particular device. You might have seen it if you're on that forum, Todd. About was this particular device worn by the only worn by the guys that were in the spruce divisions. For those who don't know, the spruce divisions were the divisions of procurement to buy wood. To buy wood so that they had wood to get airplanes. They were operating in the Pacific Northwest, looking for the right woods to construct the airplanes. I think they call them spruce divisions because they were looking for that stuff. So there you go. So that's some interesting hats from Connecticut, and I'll turn it back to you, Todd. Whoever's back, Kevin.
Thanks, Bob. That's really amazing. Anybody have any questions for Bob?
Yeah. Bob, actually, since you're in aviation and RAF and RFC and all that, I'm going to actually send you some private stuff. I'm researching some cocktails that have to do with the RAF around that time.
Okay.
And there's some nomenclature that I'm kind of unsure of. So
all right.
I'll send you some messages. Thanks.
Do my best.
So cool. Anybody else want to talk hats? How about Luke? We haven't had any Navy chatter in a little Luke, you're up.
So
What
this
is that?
This is one of my favorites and the one that I wear aboard Olympia, and one that you don't see that often for a U.S. Navy warrant officer.
Oh, nice.
And so how you tell the difference between a warrant and a commissioned officer, to see the two side by side, the commissioned officer has the eagle with the shield and the crossed anchors, and the chin strap, which is a 1/2 inch. The warrant officer has the crossed anchors and the 1/4 inch chin strap. Otherwise, the regulations are exactly the same. So this is the U.S. Navy regulation from around 1905, but as you can see, the hats are all over the place. You see them with more bell crowns, lower crowns. You even see ones like this coming into style around the Spanish-American War era. So this one is not actually a Navy warrant officer's cap. I can't afford a real warrant officer's cap because they're kind of like hen's teeth. When you see them come up, they go for pretty expensive money. This is a repro I put together to use aboard Olympia, but it is a period hat. And one of the neat things about it is this label. It was actually for a commercial cruise line.
Huh.
So I've still got the original commercial cruise line buttons that went with it and the cruise line insignia. And I just put the Navy, took those off and put the Navy stuff on because you can just pop them off and put them on again. But all the Navy insignia is made so you can take it off. You have a regulation for a blue cap or a white cap, and many of them you see are just white covers that go over the top. Or you have a specific white cap or a specific blue cap. And I know Todd's got one that's got just a plain frame, and then there's a blue cover that slides over the top, and then a white cover that slides over the top. And they also have all manner of rain covers and other stuff that go with them. But the warrant officer is a pretty neat one. That's one of those things to wear if you don't look for it, you don't see it. But if you look closely in Navy photos of the period, that's the thing to look for, is the crossed anchors on the front of the cap, and that's how you can kind of tell them apart, because otherwise you would just miss them in the crowd.
Yeah, to Luke's point, a lot of the caps of this time period, not just the Navy caps, if you were to unthread the buttons, because they have a little threaded stalk on the back, chin strap comes off, and you can see the stud where you thread in your button. And a lot of these guys, they're just a cover over a central frame. So in Luke's case, if it were this time of year and he was on a ship and it's going to get into a warmer season and he wanted to switch over to a white cover, he would take off his blue cover, put on his white cover, and go off and be happy only having to buy one cap instead of having to buy like 3 or 4 or 5, depending upon the situation.
Yeah, and I've seen quite a few that are like this one that are just blue and then have a white cover that goes over the top, because it's sometimes easier just to have one that's one color and then you slide the top over whichever one that you like. So the originals that I've made, it took a little bit to pattern them and make them, but I've made a few for some of the Olympia guys, rehabbing caps and making the cap covers and everything. It's a pretty interesting odyssey to do that, and to do a little bit of research into what the Navy officer caps look like, to make sure that you get it right and get all the details right for them. But they're interesting little things, you know. I mean, it's interesting too. I mean, even though the Navy regulations are specific about what you're supposed to have, again, you see them all over the place with the different shapes, like this one, which is a more crushed down, and then the more bell crown style. And I've got 2 more that are even different shapes than this. So it's all about where you purchase it and what shape you like, you know. So the Navy officer caps are kind of all over the place, just so long as it kind of loosely conforms to the regulations, that you're all good. Plus, cats like them. You can see how thrilled my buddy Lucian is here.
Would that have been up through World War I?
Yeah, that the regulations for these type of caps are from 1905 all the way up through the change in regulations starting in 1919, and then they firmly changed in 1921. And that's when you see the wider brims on the cap, although you see a lot of guys wearing the bell crown style up through the early 20s. That the Navy regulations stipulated that you could wear the older style uniforms until you wore them out, and then whenever you got new ones, you had to conform to the newer regulations.
Cool. Anybody else want to chime in? Who wants to show off what they got on? Joe Korber. I'm going to unmute you and I'm going to spotlight you.
Hello, am I there?
Yep. Yes.
There I go. Okay, home team, Vive la France. We're sporting right now. The coolest that I think is the hat they had was the first year of the war, and this was the only hat, the kepi, just like the Civil War style hat that we're so fond of. This particular kepi is a simplified version that they started producing not too far into the war because, well, they were outfitting a lot of guys and uniforms cost money. So the original kepis had piping on them and all kinds of stuff. And they started simplifying them slowly through 14. This one is the light blue wool. It has two delightful little vents on either side. And it's a pretty snazzy hat, but the Adrian helmet's going to cramp its style big time because you can't wear an Adrian helmet on top of this hat. And it doesn't fit well in the tiny little knapsack that the French government gave you. So the French Army is going to first issue, which I do not have, berets, which sounds so French. There's already a berets, the Alpine Chasseurs, who are a very elite special unit, and they get really pissed off that everybody else is going to be wearing the same hat that they're wearing. And apparently they had some juice because they get rid of the berets pretty quickly, and the Army starts wearing the old bonnet de police. This is the 1915 version of it. It's kind of snazzy. It has a very subdued profile. You can see it looks like a lot of the hats that Bob was showing in terms of its profile. It's a little bit easy to trick out. I sewed the center shut so that you could wear it kind of cool like, and their photographs, and I've seen this with guys in Glengarry's too, they wear them in such a way as almost to defy gravity. You know, they're wearing them almost pinned to the side of their head. But this will end up being the off-duty fatigue hat on the regs for the rest of the war. You can fold these down. You can wear this under your helmet, or it fits real nice and easy in your coat pocket or your knapsack. Now, Jared was talking about this last week. 1918 rolls along, and guys are starting to feel better about themselves. So they start looking for a new look. And initially, these were private purchase, but they got so popular that the Army began to issue them. It's a version of the bonnet de police, but it has an older profile to it, what they call an Empire-style profile. So,
Hey, Joe,
so
turn sideways so we can see it sideways.
Sure.
Yeah, it's easier. Yeah, that's better to see it.
Hold on, here we go.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, much better that way. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, like I put this on to take an image, a photograph down in Pennsylvania, and my wife looked at it and says, "You look like you work at a hamburger joint." But the cool thing about this was it had a look that harkened back to a better times in France. And also, it was cheaper to make, which is always a big deal. Money, money, money. And this only required like 3 pieces of material to make. And guys could trick it out with piping or insignia and things like that. And this kind of rolled out to the end of the war. This one and this one. Vive la France. Okay.
Hey, Joe, I got a question for you, Joe.
Sure.
When was the color change from the dark blue to the horizon blue?
They started making the kepis in that light blue as early as September 1914.
They did, huh? Okay, I wasn't
The
aware of that.
uniform goes blue, that blue basically in 1915.
Mhm.
And I don't know if they told the great story. Once somebody told me, "Oh, don't worry, nobody will see you at dusk or dawn with this uniform on." Now I got to say, I've seen photographs of us in the early evening in Newville, and yeah, we're hard to see. But in daylight, man, we stick out like a sore thumb.
Thanks, Joe.
Okay.
Tom, you want to talk about what you got on?
It's basically the French style of the overseas cap, but with the eagle, globe, and anchor on it. And there are accounts of Marines going with the French style, which I'm with the 78th Company, 6 Marines up at Newville. So instead of wearing the odd-looking overseas cap, I enjoy the French style a lot more. I think it looks cooler. But yeah, and I got also other headgear here, helmets. Kind of talked about the Navy flat hat earlier. Other than that, I think there's people here that can definitely talk a whole heck of a lot more than I can.
Anybody else want to talk about their hats?
Well, I got a question for Joe. Can we go back to Joe? Hey, Joe. Joe. Uh-oh.
Joe, I have a question for you.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, you there, Joe?
Yeah. I was getting a beer and I dropped it.
Hey, I wanted to show you something that I have. I didn't show it because I didn't know enough about it to talk about it. Let's see what you think. All right. There's the inside of it, Joe. So it's
Yeah.
All right, but the color.
All right. Well, there was a period.
What do I got there?
There's a period, definitely around 15 and 16, where they were using any kind of material you get a hold of.
Okay.
You had darker shades of blue. You had corduroy trousers. You had I've seen corduroy hats, corduroy bonnet de police. They called them ersatz. They were making stuff out of whatever they could get their hands on. It was almost like the Confederacy during the Civil War. You just grabbed what you could to make uniforms out of it, and it didn't matter what color it was. You had to put clothes on guys.
Gotcha.
So that's probably like a 15, early 16 bonnet de police.
Okay.
Because that's a legit stamp.
Yo, I'm aware of that. I just didn't know what to make of the color.
Yeah. There was moments where they were grabbing any kind of material they had on hand.
Got it. Yeah, because it's not quite as blue.
Yeah, it's almost like a royal. It's like a royal blue or something.
Yes, it's an in between. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
That's good. Hey, Kevin.
Yes.
Kevin. Oh, I dug out 2 more just because they're different, and then I'll be done. Okay. I just wanted to show something on the ladies' side. Okay.
Oh man.
So I touched on the first one on that first week. This one is a uniform from a woman who was in the National League for Women's Service. Really kind of cool. And this was for one of the Red Cross, the Red Cross Motor Corps, which is really nice. It's got these buttons on, the Red Cross kind of things there. It's got that big enameled Red Cross on there. And what's really nice about it is also I do have the name. This came with it. Red Cross Motor Corps. It was the cap of this Marguerite from World War I. Yeah, and the label inside is Franklin Simon, 5th Avenue, New York.
Whoa.
Which I thought which was kind of cool. And I've researched her, and she was in New York society and the whole business. She was older than most of the women. She stayed here and didn't go overseas. She was in her 40s. She was in her 40s by the time of World War One. But that was her cap. Great, whatever the fabric is. It's a real fine worsted of some kind. If Lillian was here, she would know what the fabric is. I have no clue.
The uniform too, Bob?
I'm sorry, no, just the cap. Just the cap.
Yeah, there's a lot of photos of those women.
Yes. So.
Any other hands going up? Carolyn? No? Okay.
Okay, Kevin, we can just say a civilian thing,
Okay.
if you don't mind. We're both wearing derbies. Mine is a Churchill from London, and Rachel's is actually a Meyer. It's made in Kentucky, which makes it actually a Kentucky Derby, which is what we would have been celebrating today. So I've got my julep here. I couldn't find it at the grocery store. But that's something that people would have definitely been doing back in 1914, 15, 16, 17. The Kentucky Derby was going on. This year, though, it's been postponed to September. So there you go. Anyway, just wanted to let you know that, we're celebrating that way. That way we can, because all my other hats are in storage.
I love the Derby. It's awesome. That's really great. Thank you.
Thanks.
Anybody else have any hat intel? Ian, what you got on?
I have a hat. I mean, it's just, good old U.S. Overseas cap. Got a little AGA on it. It's the wrong kind. It's the officer's one. That's the little whipcord fabric with the wool, because I can't read.
Cool. This is really fun tonight. This is really a great show and tell.
Also, I just finished the mask. I got the little stringy bits.
Oh yeah, talk everybody about the mask operation.
Yeah, that was quick. That was so fast.
So I started this at about an hour or so, maybe an hour and a half ago. I kind of just took some fabric, cut it out into a 16 by 8 inch, folded it over and put a little bit of gauze fabric in between to kind of make this little shape here, which is 8 by 4. And I took the sides, put them over, and allowed this little bit of string here to be in between, which can slide either way. And then would just I can't tie with enough. But you just kind of tie it off behind the head and neck. Someone could probably do that more gracefully. Yeah,
that's really cool. Because if we do have an event in place that's going to require masks or recommend masks, it'd be good to have those, and everybody has the same style. And it also is good living history too, and protecting you. Anybody else have any news for the week? Well, next week, we can ask, we're going to have a horse discussion with Brian and Paul. So tune in next week for everything with 4 legs. And
not everything.
Well, the big ones, the bigger ones. So that'll be fun. And probably continue up until but anybody else have any news or anything to share?
Hey, one thing, Kevin, is John Ilian? Does he know all about the horses? Because he could bring much to the table about veterinary such and equipment.
I'll ask him. He works 1 week on, 1 week off.
Okay.
So I'll definitely. He also likes to, not use the computer. Find out.
Oh. Okay.
Anything else, anybody?
Well, out here on the West Coast, we're currently still scheduled to have our event on Angel Island the last weekend of July. I guess it's similar to you guys' Camp Doughboy, but Angel Island is a big stepping off point for guys on the West Coast. It's in the San Francisco Bay. We go over for the weekend. We typically sleep in 1906 quartermaster warehouse because all the barracks buildings are empty shells that are collapsing. And we basically do an immersion event for the weekend. I would invite you all to come out, but I realize it's a very long drive for all of you.
Thanks, Damian.
Yeah, I've seen photos of that event in the past. It looks like a lot of fun.
Yeah, if you can make it out, it's other than your trip is your expense because we have to supply our own food, but they let us they take us over on the ferry and don't charge us. They don't charge us to be there. They give us a place to sleep. Yeah, it's actually a lot of fun.
You mean is it a national park?
Yeah, it's a state park.
That's cool.
Yeah, but the Army was on the island from 1863 to 1962. There's 3 Coast Artillery batteries. Camp Reynolds on the west side dates to 1863. There's a lot of buildings from the 1860s, 1870s there up till the warehouse from 06 is the last building they built there. By that point, they'd shifted focus to the east side of the island, Fort McDowell, and Fort McDowell is mostly concrete mission-style buildings.
Cool. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Yeah, I'll have to get your information on that because I'm actually from the Bay, so might be in town sometime.
Yeah, love to have you.
That's really cool.
And Todd and I have been known to drive halfway across the country to do programs, and we've been invited out a couple of times by Adam Lidd and those guys. So don't be surprised if we show up on your doorstep one day.
Yeah, no, I know Adam Lidd. He's been there a couple times.
We've got a lot of time saved up from trips that have been canceled, so you never know.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. All right, thanks, Reb. This was fantastic this week. It was really great to see everybody.
Yep.
Stay safe, and we'll see you next week.
Next week.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Next week.
Guys.
Take care, everybody.